Yeah, where can they order? Where can they get tickets online?
Well, probably the easiest thing to say is at ciderswig.org.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Dr. Right? We're going to say Dr. Julianne?
Sure.
We're going to do it? Okay. Ann Gustanski. And Julianne is one of the original 5 members of the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation, right? Am I exactly correct so far?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And today we're going to talk about the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation, but we're also going to talk about what's going to be the 9th annual Cider Swig. And Julianne, why don't I kick it over to you? Give my guests some background of you, and we'll start with Cider Swig. So let's just your background, and then we'll transition into Cider Swig.
Okay, that sounds good. My personal background?
Sure. How'd you get to Gig Harbor?
How did I get to Gig Harbor? It was a circuitous path. So my professional background is in natural resource economics, environmental law, and policy. And I had a couple of different lives. I've worked in the nonprofit sector, serving as the executive director of a land trust. I have been a professor. I have been an attorney, and let's see what else. And for a long time, I was almost a professional student, gathering various degrees from various universities, but all of those degrees basically came together into natural resource economics, environmental law, and policy. A lot of the work that I did in the early part of my career centered on land conservation. I've written a few books, many journal articles, a lot of it for about the first 2 decades of my professional career centered on land conservation. Oh. And then through a chain of various events, I ended up as a professor at Rensselaer in upstate New York. And soon after I was there, I was starting to have communications with a firm that was an economics firm based out of Oregon, and they really wanted to have. They wanted 2 things. They wanted a woman PhD, and they wanted somebody who had a background working with tribes and with nonprofit organizations. So one thing led to another. I talked with them, and after about 4 trips from New York to Washington, I ended up accepting a position. I did that for about 8 months, and then said, you know what, that's a really long drive from Gig Harbor, where I decided was the community for myself and my daughter, who was maybe 9, 10, 11, something like that at that time.
We'll call it preteen.
Yes.
Okay.
And we had moved around quite a bit. From 3 until 8, she lived in Scotland with me, where I was both a student and a lecturer. And then we lived in Thailand for a bit, where I was then a professor as well. And then we lived in upstate New York, in Saratoga Springs. And then we landed in Minnesota for a hot minute, which is where I actually grew up. Okay. And then we went to New York, and then to Washington. And by the time we landed here, she said, "Yeah, could we just maybe stay here for a little while?"
Okay. Well, let me ask you, where did you start your college career at? Where did you get your undergrad at?
My undergraduate degrees are from the University of Minnesota. So,
Okay.
and yeah, so, but it was back in a day when they didn't have these bifurcated or conjoined degrees. So I convinced one of my advisors to work with another advisor, and I created a conjoint or whatever, a dual focused degree.
Okay.
And it was basically natural resources and law.
What? So you're 17, 18 years old, you're starting college. What was the...
Yeah, something like that. 18.
Something like that, right? Yeah. Okay. So what was at that early age, that was the direction you wanted to go in. What do you think was the motivation or inspiration to pursue that educational path?
Honestly, if I have to go back all the way back to about 4th, 5th, 6th grade, it was a time when Rachel Carson's book had come out, and we talked a lot about the environment, and we talked a lot about pollution. And I really liked rocks. And every time we went on a family camping trip, I would haul my father out to go rock hunting. And then I started liking the sciences. So it was kind of, as long as it had an IST at the end of it, by the time I was in 6th grade, I said, so I either want to be an environmentalist or a naturalist or a biologist or a geologist. As long as it had one of those things after it, that was okay with me. Well, so that was kind of then. And then by the time I got through high school, I really started to have a keen interest in law and particularly natural resource law. There had been some famous cases that were being resolved in the state of Minnesota. One of them had to do with the mining region and taconite and asbestos and all sorts of different things. So I started having an interest then. But still, I had told my parents, you know what, though, I think I'm going to get married. And maybe I'll go into hair, because that's what both of my parents did. And my dad said, no, that's not what you're going to do. I said, well, because I was one of those people, I decided knew what I was going to get married in. I had a longtime boyfriend, and we were going to do this thing. And anyway, my dad said, well, we'll make a deal with you. See if try a year of university and see if you like it. See if you find a different passion. But he said, I know that you are not going to be happy doing what I do, standing behind a chair 14 hours a day, chatting people up and putting up with their frustrations when they don't like what you've done to their hair or whatever. So, I was kind of like, okay, well, fine, I'll fill out an application, but I'm only going to fill out one application, and it's going to be to the University of Minnesota, which at that time had just started a program for paralegals, legal assistant. So I said,
okay.
So I'll fill out an application, and I got accepted. And then, well, the rest is kind of history. I buzzed through that, went to school every quarter that I possibly could, summers included, did get married, but I did not go into hair. And then, by the time I was done with my second year, I basically said, this is exactly what I want to do. And I needed to get 2 people to basically sign off on my proposed strategic plan to get this dual degree. And And so it happened.
Wow, that's okay.
So that's all, that there was a lot of drama and other things in the middle.
Of course, but see, so it's a couple of, these are the takeaways that I pick up from that. Number one, you're not the first person to be on the show that goes and says it's something like this. And I'm kind of teasing you, so don't take me seriously. I liked rocks. Like, you're embarrassed by it. And so many people like kind of say it like, oh, I like rocks. Like that's something you wouldn't want to acknowledge, but actually there's so many people that think rocks.
I polished them. I picked up fossils.
Yeah. See, rocks are people think rocks are cool, but yet if you say I like rocks, most the people I've noticed, they say it in this like self-deprecating manner. Like, I don't know. I like rocks.
Yeah.
And so that was yeah. So
I liked rocks. I still like rocks, but
yeah. See,
anyway.
So they're pretty. One of the guests I had on the very beginning of the show a couple of years ago now is a geology professor at Central Washington University, and this guy's got a YouTube channel with, I don't know, multiple thousands of followers. He's had a show on PBS. And
is it called I Like Rocks?
No, it's Nick. His name is Nick Zentner, and I'm talking to this guy, and I'm really early on in doing the show. He's like my 7th guest, and I was really nervous. I hadn't. Well, really quickly. So now, like, you and I talked on the phone before we do this, we kind of have a little familiarity. I didn't do that. Well, this guy, basically, we get on the call like this, and he goes, "Okay, let's go, hit record." And I'm like, "Oh," and he just kind of took over because he's very comfortable in front of a camera and a microphone, and we're talking, and we're having this hour-long-ish conversation, and during one part of it, he's talking about, have you been to the Enchantments? Okay, you've been to the Enchantments, right? Okay. So he's talking about the rocks from the Enchantments coming from down in Baja, California originally. And I went, whoa, wait a second, stop. He goes, oh, you're listening. And so he's talking about how, through millions of years of the Earth's shifting, those rocks that were originally created down basically in Baja, California, if you will, have been pushed up north, up into Canada in some ways. And I just thought that was fascinating. Here he's making rocks it's fascinating. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Question.
It was probably I was a little bit obsessive compulsive, but I had a rock tumbler. I made jewels. One camping trip, we were in Montana, and I was hell-bent to find a Montana moss agate. And we got into this campground right around dusk. My parents said, well, we really need to have some dinner first. And I was like, okay, well, I also have 2 siblings, and they were younger. I was probably around 12 at the time. And so we have dinner. It's getting darker. My dad said, oh, yeah, it's no problem. We'll go. The park ranger had told him kind of where to go to find these treasured Montana moss agates. But we had to go down to like a stream bed. We had to climb through a barbed wire fence to get there. And we're down there just with a flashlight and a bucket. And suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, we hear this moo, just like mooing. And my dad turns around with the flashlight, and there's this big bull, like right there, right in our face. And we ran very fast, and I got my pants caught on the barbed wire getting out of there. Probably would have been fine if we just stayed still, but we didn't. And so we kind of got chased away. And then, that's kind of how I learned that in the West, there is grazing on public lands, which I have come to actually analyze in my professional life, but I never thought I would be doing that. We also did not think that we would be. Pardon?
Did you find the rock?
Yes, we found a couple of them, but we were not down there for very long. And so the next effort to get a Montana moss agate was a lot easier. We just went into a rock shop.
Okay.
Way easier.
All right. Last question of the backstory, if you will. You moved to Gig Harbor. Your daughter said she wanted to kind of settle down. Is your daughter in Gig Harbor still, or is she now moving around the world and traveling?
She has moved around the world, and she has come back to Gig Harbor.
Okay.
Yeah, she did her undergraduate degree at a small, dually accredited American Swiss university in Lugano, Switzerland. Came back, did her master's degree at the University of Washington, MBA, and worked for a short period of time in commercial real estate, and decided that was not her gig at all. And when she resigned, the board of directors from the foundation were like, what do you think? We'd like to speak with Ariel. And they hired her.
Oh, okay.
And I'm still a volunteer 16 years later. So.
Okay. Well, that's quite a fascinating backstory. Now we're gonna jump to cider, and that just seems like a really large jump from law and environmental work and that to jump to a cider. But when we talked on the phone, if my memory serves me right, the idea of the Cider Swig, so this is the 9th annual one, right? I think you took a year or two off because of the word that we don't like to say.
Well, technically we still did it, but
okay,
it was
that's right.
Festival in a
Virtual.
box.
Festival in a box, okay. But now this started as a fundraiser to help fund the programs for the foundation, correct?
Yes, to specifically provide funding for environmental grants. It's an environmental grant program called Lou Windsor Memorial Environmental Grant Program.
Okay.
So yes, it funds everything from environmental education to on-the-ground conservation, restoration, things that fundamentally benefit the KGI watershed, which is the watershed in which we live.
Okay. So this year, it's going to be held at the LeMay Museum in Tacoma, which I think is kind of humorous that a Gig Harbor organization is coming across the bridge to Tacoma, but I kind of give you a hard time. But it's because it makes it logistically, it makes sense. It's a good location, lots of parking.
Yes. I mean, basically the festival got too large for the location that we had been at in Gig Harbor. There just wasn't enough on-site parking, and the parking started spilling into the arterial roads. And the last year that it was in Gig Harbor, it also rained pretty heavily the morning before. So the fields were quite mucky, not being specifically designed for people to be trouncing around on them when they're wet. And we looked, I mean, it was after that Cider Swig in 2019 that we started really evaluating how are we going to do this? If this festival keeps growing, how are we going to do this? And we're all volunteers, and we had talked about, well, maybe if we just try and spread it out over 2 days. And we all looked at one another. It's like, oh man, our bodies hurt so bad after one day. How are we going to do 2? And so, so we looked, and we even looked to like South Kitsap to see if there was a possible location, but it wasn't. I mean, when you're bringing that somewhere between 2,000 to 3,500, 4,000 people in for an afternoon of fun, that's a lot of cars. This is America. A lot of people don't put 5 or 6 people in a car and head anywhere. It's 1 or 2, right?
So you're anticipating so what we've got for this year, independent on when somebody's listening to this, but we're talking in early September of 2022. The festival this year is the September 24th And for this year, you're anticipating
A couple
4,000, couple thousand people.
Couple thousand. One of the things that we aren't doing this year, which was kind of the gem of, or one of the gems, the cider is the gem, but one of the nice things about what we did when we put this all together was we wanted it to be family friendly. Mm-hmm. So many festivals like this, I mean, they are 21 and over, but we wanted it to be family friendly. Well, not that we were trying to encourage young children to taste cider, because obviously that's against the law. But we found a way to have a separate cider garden where people could go and enjoy, but then we would have all sorts of different games, bounce houses, like a big apple launching with targets out in the back, pie contests, just face painting, like a small town festival.
Okay.
And that was a huge draw for families. And the other thing that we offered that was really unique is we call it the Applet Zone. And you can basically, for a very small fee, that was like $8 or $9, drop your sprogs off for up to an hour. And you can then go to the cider garden, and then you can come back and pick them up. And while they were off doing their thing in the Applet Zone, they would be playing games, doing face painting, having a snack, whatever. Under the foundation is a nature-based preschool. And so our teachers would basically run that drop off. And so you had to be potty trained. So kind of like ages 3 up until 10, the older kids didn't necessarily want to be there, but we found ways to make it fun for everybody.
Okay. And so are you doing that this year, or
we are not doing that this year.
Okay.
Just out of caution, really, and trying to, kids are kids, and there's so many touch points. And we thought, well, we just don't, we don't want to be a place where there's all sorts of super spreading happening. It may happen anyway, I don't know. But we just thought this would be a safer path for the first year back.
All right. Well, let's I kind of got ahead of us here. So let's talk about the history of the Cider Swig. So how did your organization come up with the idea, and how is the festival changed over 9 years?
So,
it's grown.
Yeah, it has grown quite a bit. I think we had 600 in our first year, something like that.
Okay.
Well, the idea basically was spawned out of a spawned. It was spawned out of something that I saw in a air flight magazine while coming back from Pennsylvania, which is where I actually worked in the land conservation field for a long time. And they were just starting a new festival, and it was called Pour the Core. This is a cider festival. I'm like, we can do that. We had helped to start the Gig Harbor Beer Festival, but that took a different path. And we said, well, we still need to do something to raise, at least $20,000 or $30,000 so that we can continue this grant program. And so when I got back, I brought the magazine and I said, and the way the foundation is set up is we have 5 core areas: arts and culture, education, parks and environment, recreation, and social capital. And social capital is kind of a catch-all for the work that we do related to local food insufficiency or hunger, and our senior center. So anyway, we had a CAB meeting Parks and Environment, which we call P&E CAB. We had a meeting within a day or two of when I got back, and I pulled out the magazine. I said, I think we should do a cider festival. And they kind of all looked at me like, cider, like English cider? I said, yeah, well, kind of. And then we talked a little, and I had spent, I lived in Scotland for close to 11 years of my life. And I came to know and like cider. But cider was just starting a resurgence in this country. And so I'm like, I think it could work. I think it could be good. And anyway, we kind of got everybody to consider it. And then we started planning for it. And then it was kind of we do a lot of things in groups or small groups. And so even the name of the event took many different group meetings before we came up with Cider Swig. It's like, no, we can't do a Gig Harbor Cider Festival. No, we wanted to be more general than that. So,
okay. So that first year, now, let's see, help me with math. That'd be what, 2014. So there was nowhere near the number of cider makers in Washington State that there are today. It was growing, but it wasn't, you didn't have, what is it? There's 100 and, don't quote me on this, 130 plus cider makers.
Yes, there's many,
yeah.
many. Yeah. And they're of all sizes and dimensions.
Right. So that first year was it, so you had 12. This idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had this idea, but were the cideries on board? When you started approaching?
They were, yes. And
okay.
I think, that first year was also the year that my daughter turned 21. So in kind of lining up the most nearby ciders, we spent her birthday weekend up in Port Townsend, and then we visited several cideries, Eagle Mount and Alpen Fire, and maybe there was one other one.
Probably Finn River.
Finn River, that's it. And Finn River was still back on the farm. But yeah, so we visited and we sipped cider and introduced them to this festival, left a piece of paper with them. And then we kind of did the same another weekend with some friends. And so that first year there were 12 that participated. And the furthest away was Pair Up from East Wenatchee.
Okay. And
I think that they had just gotten started. Mark, I believe it is. It's Mark and Kevin, two brothers. Mark comes with a couple of kegs, doesn't even know how much he should be charging for the kegs, because the deal is you pour the cider, and at the end of the day we'll reimburse you for whatever cider you have sold. Plus we had a little tent area where people could buy things that they liked when they were there, but at that time not even all of those, the ones who participated, weren't all doing bottling or canning. So it was only those who actually were a little bit further along in the process that had stuff to buy. But it was a good day. It was 12 tents and about 600 people, and we all had a good time, and we said, okay, this worked. And so and we went forward from there. And there's still a couple of people who were part of that very first Cider Swig who also have been involved in various levels with the formation of the organization. So there's a few diehards like myself who just don't know if we don't know any better or what. But we have a couple of people who have been around all 16 plus years.
Wow. All right. So year 2, how many cideries showed up for year 2?
I think we were up to 16 then.
Okay, that's good growth.
And then, then it went to like 24, and it kind of hung around 24 for a number of years. Most of these enterprises are small businesses, and many of them are not they're not their primary source of income. It's changing for some of them. It now has become, but it didn't, but many of them, it's, there's all sorts of different stories that we learn, it's like from people who are doing it now and with their brother, but they're retired, to people who are, had an idea and they're like, oh, okay, well, this is fun. And now they're doing, they quit their day jobs and
now they're doing cider. So this year, what cideries are going to be at Cider Fest or Cider Swig? I'm going to call it Cider Fest all along, just because that's just. But anyway, Cider Swig, which is actually a much better name. But who are you? Who's agreed to participate this year?
So this year we have, we have about 32. Maybe it's 34. Wow. I don't know. The number keeps kind of changing. And as in past years, the predominance of cideries attending are from Washington and Oregon. We used to actually have more coming from Oregon, but I think, life has changed for everybody, and just even the idea of traveling this far and burning up so much gas, who knows what. But there's also, so in both states, there's all of the dimensions of cider making have changed, and a lot of them now have their own establishments, right? They have a tap room, or they have a little restaurant with a tap room. So a lot of things have changed, but we have Two Town Cider House, 19 Acres Cider, Ace Cider, which is the first ever California cider that we will have, Avid, Bad Granny, Bauman's, Black Fleet Brewing, which is not cider at all, but they are one of our local brewers, craft beer. And they will be doing both beer, and they also make root beer and cream soda, I think it is. So they'll be pouring some non-alcoholic beverages. Bushel and Barrel, which is from Kitsap County. Channel Marker Cider, Cockerel, is from Pierce County.
Puyallup.
Yep, Puyallup. Discovery, which is a newer cidery based out of Tacoma. Dragon's Head from Vashon. Fierce County, another Puyallup-based cidery. Finn River. High Desert Fermentation, which is a new one that just signed on from the Yakima area. Incline, Locust. We have one distiller, Mastro Giannis, Distillery and Winery.
Yep.
Millhouse, Nashi Orchards, Offset, Old Swede. I think Old Swede is probably from the furthest away. He's from up in the Tonasket area.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a 5.5 hour drive.
Yeah, you can't get to Tonasket in less than 5 hours from anywhere, even next door. Tonasket is one of those places in the world that you just can't get to, and I got to go there tomorrow. So, One
Tree, Pair Up, Puget Sound, Rattlesnake Hills, Renaissance Orchards, Republic of Cider, Seattle Mead, Schilling, Sig's Brewing, which is another local beer maker, Sky River Mead and Wine, Snowdrift Cider, Spin Cider, and Tart Cider. And that's who we have right now. Something inevitably happens every year, where something happens where people suddenly can't make it, and somebody new shows up. So we do plan on having about 30 to 2-ish cideries, plus these other few libationistas.
But see, that's smart because not everybody likes cider. Not everybody likes wine. Not everybody likes beer. So if you were having just a beer festival and all you had was beer, my wife might not want to go along. Okay. Whereas if it's a wine thing, I might not want to go along. So having something that I might enjoy or somebody else might enjoy is, I think, smart.
We started doing that a few years ago, and it was more like, well, you know what? They're local, like Heritage Distilling. They're local. Now they're huge, but when we got started, they were in their process of becoming huge. Or there's Olala Vineyards and Winery. There was a few local things that we said, well, let's at least, they're local. So let's give them let's ask them if they're interested. So we did. We started it a few years ago, and it's never quite the same mix of folks, but we have some cideries who are in our 100% club. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So who's in the 100% club?
Pair Up is Dragon's Head, Fin River. Who else? Snowdrift.
Okay.
Trying to think. I don't think Two Towns. Portland Cider would have been if they were in this year, but they're not. And One Tree missed a year, so they don't get counted. I think that's it, basically.
But still, they wouldn't keep coming back if it wasn't good exposure for their product.
Yeah.
And so if you're expecting 2,000 people to come through and you're going to have, let's say, 32 booths of beverages, you're also having food.
Yes. 8 food trucks.
Okay. 8 food trucks.
Everything from kind of classic burgers to we have Uncle Mike is bringing Filipino comfort food. Starvin' Marvin hot dogs, barbecue, Polish cuisine on wheels. I am going to have to test their pierogies.
Wait a second. So real Polish cuisine.
Yeah, the food truck is called Polish Cuisine on Wheels. Pierogies, kielbasa. Maybe they'll have stuffed cabbage. I don't know.
The reason I'm asking you is an earlier guest is a chef, and she was born in Poland, grew up in Chicago, moved to Seattle, and we were talking all about how she got started cooking, and so it was cooking in the house, for the family and all this stuff. And she was, grandma was preparing, traditional Polish food and blah blah blah. We're talking about all this stuff. Well, she has a pop-up business, and she does Austin, Texas inspired breakfast tacos. So nothing to do with Poland at all. And the tacos are amazing. I went to the Lake Forest Park farmers market where she was at one day, and I was just like, wow, these are delicious. But anyway, when we were talking, she kind of was talking about Polish food, and I'm just like, I'm going to give her a call and say, hey, you should go down to Tacoma and see what's there.
Yeah, it's. I think the food truck is out of the Seattle area. It's not. Okay. This is the first time they will be working with us, and anyway, but yes, Polish cuisine, and all right, and the pie bar, which is has savory and sweet pies, Jamaican food, Jigos.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so and every year we have a slightly different mix of food. Arnold's Happy Days, which is classic burgers, wings, fries, that kind of stuff. They will have been with us a few years, as the same with Boss Mama's Kitchen. And she does some awesome grilled cheese sandwiches.
And then live music is more local musicians?
Yes, some of them are very local. 2 of the groups are actually from Gig Harbor. So the Shy Boys, which is our closing band, They're kind of everything from, I don't know, kind of like country pop. Mostly, I would say mostly like rock and roll covers from anywhere from the 50s through today. And Spare Time is, they are dueling fiddles, twin fiddles, two women who have been fiddling together for a long time. They don't have a huge web presence, but they're pretty awesome, and they're local, and they support the foundation. Charlie Meacham and her husband Chuck have been supporters of the foundation in many different ways, and Chuck was actually on the first team that helped organize the Cider Swig. So anyway, and then we have two not Gig Harbor based, but Seattle based, so kind of bigger bands, first time ever, really. The Apollo Trio, which is a great group, really fiery approach to lots of different genres of songs, but doing them in their own way. It's jazz, basically. And then I came to learn that the lead, James Apollo, is actually from Minnesota. So I'm like, okay, well, there's another person from Minnesota. And then Birch Piera and the Gin Joints, which is probably the biggest group, and by not like in number, but just like in kind of their territory that they cover. And they have been regulars on KNKX, and again, kind of a blend between jazz, Americana, swing, rock and roll. Very cool group, and we're really excited. I mean, it's an awesome lineup. The music is going to be awesome, and kind of 4 quite different bands, everything from 2 people fiddling to 5-person rock and roll.
So an event of this size with 34 vendors, food trucks, musicians, super easy to put together. Probably took you guys a weekend to coordinate everything, and then you spend the rest of the year doing nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
No.
It's an all-year process. I'm going to guess it's an all-year process, but
it should be. But we usually have like 2 months of recoup time. We're like, okay, we did that. It happened, and then by the time we forget how much we hurt the day after, we're back at it by January.
So really, from this 9 months worth of prep and coordinating and all of that to get this together, and for an event that really is 6.5 hours, because it's 11:30 to 6 on
the
one
gates
day.
Open at 11:30, but only if you purchased your ticket in advance. If you didn't purchase your ticket in advance, you'll be waiting until 12 and in a line. So and that's if we have tickets left. We only purchase so many little cider cups, so that's how we define how many. When we sell the last little cider tasting cup, that's it. We're sold out.
You're sold out.
Yeah.
Okay. But all this effort is for a 6.5 hour experience maximum for the audience, not for you. It's a year-long experience. It has. Is this your first year? This is not the first year at LeMay, correct? Did you do?
It's our
LeMay?
first year with live festival at LeMay. So after we looked back in 2019, through 2019, we said, okay, we really do need to try and find a different location because of so many things. And then a little thing called COVID came along around March.
Not familiar with that.
Of 2020. And then we were like, oh, maybe we won't be having a festival. I think we still were a little bit hopeful for a while. And then we said, okay, that's definitely not going to work. So we basically, it's like, so how do we still make this happen, but not in a way where everybody comes together to, commune and cavort with one another. And so we came up with the Festival in a Box. And so we had already signed a contract with LeMay to do the festival there. So in 2020, what we did was we basically contacted our cider makers and said, this is our plan. Who's in? And so then we created like 2 or 3 different sizes of kits. And then we also contacted a local barbecue place and a local caterer who's been so good to us over so many years. And we said, we have no idea how many kits we'll sell. We have no idea how many people will sign up to either get a barbecue meal or a charcuterie board, but this is our plan. And so they came along basically. And so, it was kind of, you could go online, order the size kit you wanted. And if you wanted to have an add-on meal, then you just drive through, pick it up, take it home, and celebrate cider at your house with your friends and family.
So this is me just guessing. I'm going to guess that the two festivals in a box were not as successful. Not as many people participated as would attend a live event.
Correct.
That's my guess.
I mean, I think
But were they? Did you feel like they were successful?
We felt they were successful in a couple of ways. We were still able to put money into the environmental grant program. So we were still able to award grants, which that grant program has historically also been jointly funded between the foundation, Pierce County, and Peninsula Light is actually the founder of it. So like a lot of things that now happen under the foundation, they had a life that started somewhere else. In any case, we now manage the fund and the grant program. So I can't remember where the question started, but yes, we were successful in that we were still able to carry out the intent, and we still helped these small businesses who were, if suddenly you're even if you had a tap room, those had to be closed, right?
Well, absolutely. No,
everybody was down. And the caterer, so you're not having parties, you're not having, and the barbecue joint, pretty much you had to figure out a new way to do things. So we felt like we were helpful in that regard. A little bit anyway.
So the most overused phrase of the COVID experience is we pivoted during COVID.
Yes, we did.
Pivot. But what's been interesting to me as I continue to have conversations with people like yourself, not saying that COVID wasn't devastating, it absolutely was. But people's response to COVID, things that have come about that are positive, have been really interesting in so many ways. Businesses that they were forced to go online, let's say. It was a matter of, not because they wanted to, it was a matter of survival. And now their online presence is probably a bigger revenue generator than their brick and mortar location. Or how musicians started releasing music differently to stay relevant and stay practicing their craft and trying to stay,
Right.
afloat financially. All these things that people did across all sorts of different genres,
Right.
and that's fascinating. But this year, you expect 2,000 people. We're just gonna, depending on how many little red. I'm joking. We're gonna call them little red Solo cups.
They're not. They're not those, but it's a mini wine glass, basically.
Mini wine glasses. Okay. So the collaboration, you're using LeMay's facilities, not the museum itself, but you're using the outdoor part, correct?
Correct. Yes, it's on Hobb Field, which is actually specially designed to withstand the kind of wear and tear that having like a traveling car show, and
right.
It has special grit, even though it's grass, it's got special gritting, and the water flows through and down into basically a system that cleans the water and pumps it back to somewhere else. But so from that standpoint, we don't have to worry about that mud situation if it should rain. The field is, it's very specifically designed to withstand cars and trucks and a lot of traffic.
A lot and more weight than
yes.
a few kegs of cider. Does the event? Is there a way? Do you anticipate, since you're doing this, but do you anticipate people going from Cider Swig into the museum and checking out the cars, or vice versa?
Hope so.
I mean,
that's one of our deals with with LeMay, is that you can actually get, in conjunction with our event, you can get a reduced fare.
Okay.
Museum pass, $13.50 versus $18 at LeMay's door.
Okay.
And those last, they if you actually decide, well, maybe not today, they never expire, but it also allows you to go inside and use the bathroom as opposed to the porta potty.
Well, and the one downside that you've overlooked, though, is you're not allowed to take cider into the museum. You
Correct.
can't go walking around and looking at the cars while you're sipping cider. That's just not going to be allowed.
No, that is
They're
not
going to let you have that fun. Yeah. Okay. So
but we have other kinds of fun. Like we have Battle of the
right.
Pies, and we have Hammerschlagen, and Apfelweinkrug. So
we're gonna put a pin into the Cider Swig. So before we continue on, what else about the Cider Swig should we bring up, if anything? And where can people find out and get tickets ahead of time? Because you're kind of doing that scarcity thing and saying you might sell out at the door.
Yes, we typically reserve only 200 tickets for at gate for day of.
Okay.
And we're planning on a sellout based on current numbers.
That's great.
So what else should they know? Well,
where can they order? Where can they get tickets online?
Well, probably the easiest thing to say is at ciderswig.org. The festival got so big that we thought it really deserved to have its own website.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can go to the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation's website, and we have a page dedicated to the Cider Swig there. If you're on Eventbrite, you can simply type in Cider Swig and it'll pop right up.
Okay.
So that's where you can buy tickets.
And we'll put links in the show notes for this too. So,
okay, great.
So what I'd like to circle back to is the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation. What was the motivation? So you're one of the original creators of this. What was the original group's inspiration and motivation to start a foundation?
So I think I had lived in Gig Harbor all of 4 years, and I decided to attend a local meeting at one of the schools, one of the elementary schools, because we were just newly having a park district. I believe it was in 2005. The voters of the Gig Harbor area basically voted to have our own park district. And so suddenly, boom, we have our own park district. We had one employee who was the park director, and we had one part-time employee. The park district didn't have an office. They worked out of the kitchen of the one part-time employee. And anyway,
Okay.
there was a group of citizens in our community who came together at the inspiration of one gentleman who's no longer with us, but his name was Vernon Young. And there was a 19 or 20 acre parcel of land very near where I lived at the time. And they were having a community meeting about this 20 acre parcel of land that basically he coerced 5 families to come together to help buy it from a developer so that it could become a park one day. And
Okay.
And since I had this long history of working with land conservation and land conservation and community efforts to do a wide variety of things, but everything from working on historical lands to parks, I thought, well, I'll go to this. And I had just recently come off of tearing my Achilles tendon, so I hobbled in on crutches, listened, and there was it was in a elementary school cafeteria. So they had the cafeteria tables out, and there was, I would say, 20, 30 some people there. And they were talking about the vision of this park and these people who bought it with this idea that in 3 years they'd get their money back out of it because it would become owned by the park district. And anyway, so the park district's new executive director was talking about kind of the vision, and one of the representatives from this group of 5 different families who basically bought it, and then Vernon Young. They all kind of talked about it, talked about the vision, and there was a brief discussion about potentially forming a foundation. Does anybody know how to do that? I made, I guess, a serious error in raising my hand. And I talked a little bit with the kind of, we're doing some roundtable discussions, just like, what do we, well, at the time they were very focused on making sure that there were additional fields like ball fields and soccer fields, because this land was actually in the most densely populated area of the unincorporated area of Gig Harbor. There isn't a ball field, except for at Artendale Elementary School. There isn't a ball field or a soccer field or anything within this part of Gig Harbor. And so it all seemed to make good sense. And anyway, so it was, by the time I got home, about 15 minutes later, Vernon Young called me and talked to me for about 45 minutes. And one thing led to another, and then we were having meetings every week. Then by March, we decided we were going to start a 501c3 foundation to help raise the money to acquire this parcel of land. And that's how it all started. So And
And
we were all
today-
volunteers, and I worked to do the incorporating of the 501c3 papers, and we had a small board of 5 people, I can't remember. Enough to have a board, but we also had a good group of people who were very interested in making this all happen. And we met for a long time, it was almost every week, and then it was like every few weeks. And then how are we going to raise, basically we said, okay, we'll raise $500,000 to match an RCO grant that we helped put together. And then if we get the RCO grant and the $500,000 from this brand new organization that hadn't ever worked to raise a penny, then the park district only had to come up with $235,000, and boom, the deal was done. And it happened. So,
what is an RCO grant?
The Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. So you have to, basically, you have to have matching funds.
Okay.
And
So this wouldn't have come together if your fledgling organization wouldn't have been able to fundraise $500,000.
Well, yes. Basically, the park district would have had to. The park district was brand new. They would have had to figure out how they were going to get money out of a budget that they really hadn't yet had in place.
And so let's jump forward to 2022. What is the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation involved with?
Well, so we're 16 years old this year, and over the course of time, we've evolved significantly. We started out being quite specifically dedicated to things that were tied to parks and the environment. But as we were coming into, I think, like our 5th year, maybe 4th, there was a group of community members who were very interested in doing a boundless playground. And this was the first effort that it's still in a park, right? But it started taking us into an area that was more about meeting social and other types of needs in the community. So we worked. The park district said, well, we have a site and we were going to, we were just going to do a regular playground, but we have this group of, I'm just going to call it out and say group of moms, because it was a group of mothers who had children of varying abilities. Some of them had cerebral palsy. They were in wheelchairs, or they had sensory disabilities. But they were some autistic. So they were kind of all over the board. And a boundless playground is about enabling children of all abilities to get inside the playground and play alongside one another, learning from one another. So you have children who have varying abilities playing playing alongside their peers, basically.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So during the middle of that effort, we started getting lots of then different questions about, well, would your organization, what about this? What about this? What about this other thing? And so we revised our name, having started as Penn Met Foundation. And that was not because it was in any way tied to the park district, which was Peninsula Metropolitan Park District. It was more tied to a historical name for this region, which was the Peninsula Metropolitan region. And so we were always getting confused. People would call and think we were the park district. And we were like, no, but we raise money for them. So we became the Greater Gig Harbor Foundation. And then we did, in 2011 and 12, did a big like community visioning multi-year process with 35 or so different organizations and entities involved, which basically moved us into the shape that we now are with the 5 different core areas that we focus on. And so, yeah, we kind of cover the gamut of things that make a community a good place to live, work, raise your family. The things now under the foundation, we have a nature-based preschool. We have an environmental sanctuary project that was actually started by a group of retired people who live in a special retirement community here in Gig Harbor, Heron's Key. And then we have a senior center under the foundation. We have an environmental program called EnviroCorps, which actually was another effort that was started by said Vernon Young. When Vernon passed away fairly unexpectedly in, I want to say it was 2015. His family really wanted to make sure that EnviroCorps carried on doing the types of things that he was so passionate about. So it's trail maintenance, road cleanups. We do invasive species removal on properties. We've done some very massive cleanups, removing over 2 tons of garbage and human waste from a homeless encampment, cleaning it up and restoring it. So EnviroCorps does a lot of different things. We're working on a kind of a secret project, and we'll be doing a local cider with Locust Cider, which is now based here in Gig Harbor. So it's going to be a community cider project.
Okay.
Lots of different things we're involved in. So we've moved in many different ways to try and help meet diverse needs in our community.
So what do you anticipate the future to look like for the organization? What's on the, I mean, you've already just kind of disclosed the secret cider, but what's a 5-year road plan look like?
Well, one thing that we've been working on already for 5 years is what we call the community campus. There is a landowner here in our community who has offered us this once-in-a-lifetime, really, opportunity to move the foundation's offices and our nature-based preschool to a property that he bought in the end of 2017, I think.
Okay.
And that's been interesting. I mean, working to basically take almost 9 acres of land and 2 old homes and repurpose them for the nature-based preschool, and then learning gardens and the office and information area for the foundation has taken us down some pathways we never imagined going with our county, but we think we're there. We went through a conditional use process, and we have a plan for a community campus that will serve our community forever. So.
That's great. All right, that's wonderful. What about Cider Swig? What's the hope for Cider Swig moving forward? You may hang up on me when I ask this question. Do you think you might turn it into a semi-annual event?
Well, probably no, because one of the things that came out of the pandemic period was this effort to still try and raise enough funds for the environmental grant program. So we broke after one learning experience where we said, okay, that wasn't quite enough money. So in 2021, when we did think we were going to have a festival, and then suddenly we're like, oh no, we're not going to have a festival. We broke that into basically something that we did in the early part of July, and then we still did the drive-through Cider Swig.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that the first year we called it Summer Swig in 2021. Then we said, well, that's getting everybody confused, especially like we're asking for sponsorships or grants or whatever, and they think that we're still talking about Cider Swig, and we're talking about a whole new different event, kind of the same, but different. And so we evolved to this year, in our first year of live events again, it's called Summer Sips. And Summer Sips is anything you can pour out of a bottle and drink from the 253. So we had kombucha, we had some beer, we had wine. 3 different wineries participated. We had mead, we had cider, and what else? Well, Black Fleet also did their cream ale. Cream ale? Okay. No, not cream ale. Cream ale is a beer. Vanilla cream soda, something. Cream soda.
Okay.
Cream soda.
Cream soda. Okay.
So, yeah. So no, we probably won't, because the accusation has already been made that I created yet another event for us. It's like, I didn't create it. And we all said it was good and it worked and everybody liked it.
So just to clarify, so that anybody in your organization's listening, is it a correct assumption that I'm going to make here that not one person does not have the ability to sign the entire group on for an event?
Correct.
It has to be voted on. Yeah. See, so you didn't do it.
I didn't. They said,
you cannot be held responsible.
No, it was like, Summer Swig was a hit. Let's do it again. But when we come back, I was like, okay. So it's different in that it's held in our Uptown Gig Harbor area, which is basically a small shopping plaza area. And then we had live music, and it was 12 to 7. And we worked with the restaurants in the area to work out a deal where basically they gave us a portion of like 10% or 20% of proceeds if whomever came through and had a viable ticket to Summer Sips.
Okay. All right. See, yeah. So
we tried to help make sure that we weren't too impactful, on everyone, but it was a good event for first year live, and we vowed to do it again. But somebody told me I created a new event. I said, no, I only renamed it. It's like we
just have them listen to this episode where we've given clarity that you did not do that.
It was not me.
Do not shoulder that responsibility.
No.
So I got to ask this question. I ask all my guests get this question. Coffee, Gig Harbor, where to go?
Coffee, Gig Harbor, where to go? Well, Cutter's Point, probably.
Okay. Are you a coffee fan?
Yes. You can come to my kitchen and you will see.
Okay, so if you go to Cutter's Point, what would be the beverage that you would most likely order?
Well, I'm kind of I don't order things with a lot of stuff in them, so I either go for espresso or Americano.
Okay,
I'm just
right. As you should.
Yes. I don't need all that other
don't
stuff.
Apologize. That's coffee as it should be consumed, in my opinion. Okay. Where's a great place around Gig Harbor for lunch that I might not have heard of? I mean, there's a couple of places in the harbor that, have really great name recognition, which are great, but something that's a little, yeah. You got secret little place that's
I don't know if it's
good to go?
secret, but there's a new Thai restaurant is awesome. I don't know how much of a secret it is.
Well, hopefully it's not a secret because it won't be in business if it's a secret.
Yeah,
they do need publicity.
It's called Gig Harbor Thai Cuisine, and it's actually fairly near the long-standing Thai hut, but it moved into a place of the former Marketplace Grill. And their food is awesome. I mean, and I love Thai food, so I was pretty inspired.
Okay, so it stands up. All right. When you're not doing all of these things where you're creating events to run and negotiating with the county for land use and, turning 9 acres into, all of those simple, fun tasks, what do you like to do for fun and recreation?
Well, I play squash. I still like to play squash.
Okay.
It's getting a little bit hard on my body as I get older, but I do that. I kayak. I go hiking. I live on a little piece of water, which if we get our boat out at just the right time of day, we can get under the road and out into the sound.
Okay.
So yeah, I love to travel, but sometimes COVID has kind of changed that. And anyway,
traveling doesn't seem like fun anymore.
It's not as much fun.
The logistics of transportation that's changed in a negative way because of COVID.
And I did a lot of I wouldn't exactly say it was traveling. I did a lot of flying back and forth between Minnesota and Washington during the pandemic because my sister was very sick, and it was not at all fun.
No.
Traveling 3.5 hours with your mask on, suddenly, being in, even if you could get a first class seat, it really didn't matter. You had a bigger seat, but you had no food.
Yeah, you had no food. You're still wearing a mask, and you're still breathing recirculated air,
right.
And it's not a it's not a calm,
we were supposed to go to a
experience.
Wedding in Thailand, and then we're like, okay, though that's not going to happen because I'm not going to spend basically all of my time in quarantine.
Right. No, that's not. All right. So I have I'm experimenting with to wrap up questions. So the standard wrap up question is, what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know. But maybe the question everybody else asks me, are you nuts? Like, do you sleep?
Well, the risk of asking that question.
I actually have my own firm. This is stuff that I do as a volunteer.
This is all volunteer work, right? Everything we've talked about is volunteer work. But see, here's the thing. If you ask a busy person that question, there's a risk of offending them. Are you nuts is not something you say in polite company to somebody you don't know very well. But since you've opened the door, how do you do it? How do you keep
lots of coffee?
Everything? Lots of coffee. Okay. Because it sounds like you're spinning a lot of plates.
Yeah. I mean, coffee. I guess the ability to still function semi well with little sleep.
Okay. All right. So then the last question. Now play along, please. Cake or pie, and why?
If I answer cake, it's only because I like the frosting. Because I don't eat the cake.
Okay.
So I guess pie.
Okay. And
berries. I love berries.
Why? Okay, so let me ask you this question. You don't eat the cake. Why?
Because I like that really horrible high sugar frosting.
Okay, so
no, it has nothing to do with gluten.
Okay, because all right, so do you like frosting?
I like frosting, and it's probably the worst part of the cake for you. So.
I'm sure it actually isn't probably. I'm sure it is, but it's okay. So you like the sweet, sugary frosting. Okay. But pie, and you said berry. So you'd go with like a berry pie.
Yeah. Or apple pie. But
okay.
I usually go for whatever I can make from my garden. So I have blueberries, and I have apples, and I have lots of blackberries.
Okay. So, well, you have a part of your organization cleans up invasive things. So couldn't they come and get your blackberries?
Yes,
for you?
they could.
Those are...
But I pick them and I make jam, or I freeze them, or put them into pies.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm looking forward to, I think I on my calendar, I actually have the 24th is a day I can travel. And I think I'm going to do I can't say I think I'm going to do my best, and that's kind of a discount, but I'm going to do my best to attend this year's event.
All right.
It sounds like, well, it's cider, and that's in my wheelhouse, but you've got food and music. So those are, two other things that I kind of enjoy. And it'd be kind of fun to run into some of the people.
I think that's definitely been a positive. There's some great characters that we've met along the way. So, and they've become
the cider industry is
friendships. So,
yes, the cider industry has some really interesting folks in it. That's for certain. So, because I realized, you were naming names. I go, I've had them on the show. I've had them on the show. Had them on the show. Had them on the show. I should go see them all. It's like they're all kind of like in one location to go say hi.
Right.
So thank you for taking the time this afternoon to sit down with me.
Well, thank you.
I look forward to continuing to follow Cider Swig and your foundation and see how you guys can help the Gig Harbor area.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.